G'day and welcome to the Grow a Small Business Podcast. I'm your host, Troy Truen. Each week, we speak with an owner who has grown a business with 5 to 30 team members to something bigger. Diving into their numbers and unearthing the pain they've experienced, we explore what they did to overcome each barrier and what they would do differently from day one. Let's get into it. Welcome everyone. Today I'm interviewing Michael McGovern, or Govs, from Black Hops Brewery, based in Gold Coast, Australia, just out of Brisbane. Thanks for your time today, Govs.
No worries, mate. Thanks for having me on.
Now, before we start with how we know each other, you've got to tell the audience the story of why we're now recording this second shot, because you got stuck somewhere, didn't you?
Yeah, so we've been trying to have this conversation for a couple of months now. We met through a mutual friend of ours, Chris Macklin. He's setting up a distillery here on the Gold Coast, and he put me in touch with you, and we chatted about doing an episode together. But our last meeting, I was being a little bit cheeky. I thought I'd sneak out for an early morning fish with a mate of mine, and so we shot out about 4 a.m. and thought we'd get a couple of hours in, maybe pull in a Spanish. But the fish weren't biting that day, and we were coming back in just off Moreton Island, and thought we'd stop in for quick lunch and a beer at the little bar there on South Moreton Island. And we pulled in and went up to the bar, had lunch, had a couple of beers, talked to the locals, and walked back to the boat, and the tide had gone out. And the boat was sitting high and dry, and we looked like a pair of idiots. The locals thought it was quite funny, and we knew that the boat wasn't going anywhere. It weighed about 2.5 tons, was sitting on its guts, and so I had to send some emergency messages out, one to yourself, just to say I couldn't make it, with possibly the most random excuse ever, which end up being an overnight stay, because the next high tide wasn't big enough either. So we stayed the night on the boat and got comfy and cozy, and our partners still don't believe the story that we got stranded there.
Well, here I was thinking you're stuck on an actual sandbar. But it wasn't too bad if you had a restaurant and bar right there next to you.
It was the best place you could possibly get stranded, I think. We had a restaurant and a bar, fully loaded bar, about 50 metres from the boat. So
no, good. I'm glad you're here finally. Yeah, and Chris from Six Tricks Distilling Co. So that distilling business opens in April 2023, in a few months now. So I'm chairing that board there, and have invested in the business there, Chris, as the founder. He's doing a great job, as well as the rest of the team. We'll have him on in a year or so when the business is open. Tell our audience a bit about your business, what it does and how it makes money.
Yeah, sure. So my longest, most standing business that people will know me from is Black Hops Brewery. So we founded Black Hops back in 2014, back in the early days of craft beer. Just when the boom was starting to happen, but there was still a lot of work to be done in terms of getting the beers out there, getting them into bottle shops and bars. So previously to that, the story goes back many, many years. I've been a craft brewer for most of my adult life now, and I'd worked at several breweries on the Gold Coast in Southeast Queensland, and got to a point in my career where I thought I was ready to have a crack at doing it myself. And fortunately, caught up with a couple of mates of mine, Eddie and Dan, and we got talking about brewing and beer, and one thing led to another. And Eddie ended up telling a story about how he'd entered a competition to come up with an idea for a new beer for a brewery in Sydney. And he floated one of his suggestions in the competition, which he didn't win, but he got a special mention, and they responded to him, and I think they gave him a couple of cartons of beer for it anyway. But the beer that he had conspired to make was a beer that he called the Eggnog Stout, which he described to us at over a few pints was this dry Irish stout with some subtle notes of eggnog, which, is like cinnamon, vanilla, nutmeg, and brandy. And I thought the idea was fantastic. It was a really cool beer. I literally just made my first ever homebrew kit. So unlike most of my mates in brewing, I didn't start out as a homebrewer. I started out sweeping floors in a brewery. And that kind of was dated back to my experiences with homebrew growing up weren't exactly positive. I remember my old man having a crack at it, and there was, the bottles exploding under the house in the middle of the night. And
God, I remember that when I was at uni. I was in a band back when I had hair, and one of the guys, I think the bass player, down in his basement, he was home brewer, and we were practicing there, and by God, a lot of the bottles exploded that day.
Yeah, so I remember trying some of it, and it was awful. So I thought like home brewing was what you did if you couldn't afford decent beer or you didn't have any taste buds.
Yeah,
so I never thought to get into it, but I did love beer. I loved the art, and I never really considered it a career option in my early 20s. I just thought it was a nice little hobby to have, to go around on the weekends and try the latest boutique beer, they used to call it. But yeah, so I decided I'd build myself a little homebrew kit and I'd have a crack at homebrewing. So I thought, what better beer to make than this eggnog stout that Eddie had come up with. So I said to the boys, I'm like, why don't you come back to my place next weekend and we'll brew this eggnog stout. So during the week, we kind of nutted out the recipe, got some ingredients, and the boys came back the next week and we brewed 23 litres of eggnog stout. And we just had way too much fun doing it. And Eddie and I were there, milling the grain and mashing in and going through the steps. And Dan was sitting on his laptop starting to write a blog about how to brew an eggnog stout, which, I thought was hilarious because we didn't have an audience or a platform or a business. And we'd never brewed an eggnog stout before either. But Dan assured us that didn't matter. And it was kind of like a grown man's version of scrapbooking. So we created this blog about how to brew an eggnog stout that we shared on our social medias before the beer was even ready. And then for those in the audience who don't understand the process of brewing beer, it takes about 3 to 4 weeks from the day they start till the day that you can drink it. And so during those 3 weeks, it gave us a lot of time to get even more excited and carried away. So we realized we had to come up with a name for our quote unquote brewery. And so we passed a few names back and forth, and eventually one stuck, and it was Black Hops. And we thought it was a cool name. We thought it had a funny, ironic kind of underlying story to it, being like a black ops secret military operation was kind of the opposite of who we were. We were sharing everything that we were doing. We were on Instagram, we were on Facebook, we had our blog. Before we knew it, we had a website where you could order stickers and hats from. And it was just a weekend project for us. It was just something for a little, a fun way for us to get together and have a bit of fun. But it didn't take too long before we realized that there was some real potential there for turning it into an actual legitimate business. We had been closely watching what was going on in the craft community around Australia, something we were all passionate about. We knew that the boom was coming. We knew that the Gold Coast in particular needed more breweries. At the time, there was only one, which was Burley Brewing. So this was just before Bolter as well. So we decided we would take the leap and turn our garage outfit into a commercial outfit. And so we realized that we were going to have to figure out how to make and sell commercial beer, which none of us had actually done. Even though I'd worked in breweries, I'd never actually operated behind the scenes. So we looked into it. We had to get a license. We had to find a brewery that was going to be willing to let us use their equipment to make the beer, because at the time we didn't have a brewery.
So you did some gypsy brewing to start with?
Correct. So yeah, we started gypsy brewing. It was really only initially going to be like a one-off, just like a bit of a bucket list tick.
Yeah.
And it was something we also wrote a blog post about. It's like how to take your homebrew and turn it into a commercial product. And it was in those early days that we realized that our storytelling and our way of marketing was really connecting with people, and it was growing an audience quicker than we had anticipated. So we continued to gypsy brew over summer, and before not too long, we realized that it was time to take the plunge and build our first own brewery.
So how long were you Gypsy brewing for?
It would have been about 12 or 18 months.
Yeah, because I remember reading that. I thought you guys were contract brewing, but for the audience that don't understand, contract brewing is when another brewer will make the beer for you and hand it to you. But Gypsy brewing is they'll actually throw you the keys, often on a weekend or a night when they're not using their equipment, and you run the brewing equipment yourself and make that beer. So that's great. That's a great way to start as well, because obviously brewing and distilling can be a capital intensive business. So that's really clever.
Yeah, massively. So we called in a lot of favors through mates of ours who own breweries up in Southeast Queensland, and whenever they had an empty slot in their production or an empty tank, we would jump on it and brew a batch of beer there.
Yep.
It was, which is a quick and easy way to get to market. And a lot of these early strategies weren't too deliberate. We were just doing what was naturally made sense to us. And we didn't really know what our end goal was until we had signed the lease and got the keys to our own factory, and then we had to go out and buy equipment. That's probably the first time we looked at each other and we said, "Oh shit,
we've got a business.
This is actually happening. We've got bills to pay."
Yeah. Now, I've been to, how many sites have you got? Because I've been to the home.
Yeah, so we opened Burleigh Heads HQ in 2015.
Yeah,
we opened our second production site in 2018, and in Bigger Waters, which is on the north end of the Gold Coast. So that's our a much bigger production site, which allowed us to kind of expand into national markets. And then in late 2019, early 2020, we opened up in Brisbane as well.
Yep, fantastic. That's great. And just going back, so you started in 2014. How old were you when you decided to accidentally start a brewery?
How old was I?
Yeah. How old were you?
I was almost 30.
Yep.
I was 29, I think, when we decided to make the plunge into setting the brewery up.
Yep. And just going back to the journey, this how you started out with Eddie and Dan. So you had a craft brewing background. What did they jump from when you started the business? What kind of careers?
Yeah, so Dan had run his own businesses. He had a few different companies he'd run. He floated pretty heavily in like the entrepreneur world, did a lot of business speaking and a lot of marketing seminars and things like that. He also ran a WordPress support business online that he grew and sold pretty successfully. So Dan really brought that alternative marketing strategy to like what was working really well in online world in terms of like trust building, which is all about being transparent. Because in an online world you don't really have much other than trust, and if you can open up and invite people in to see the real you, then that helps to build that trust. So we kind of adopted that into a brick and mortar business, which at the time was not very common. People weren't too keen to share their recipes, their processes, their financials, but we saw it as a massive value add that our audience really engaged in. And part of that was just kind of identifying who our customers really were. So we were making beer. So our customers are anyone who enjoys beer. However, if you break it down a little bit more, our customers are other small business owners. They're bars and bottle shops who are buying our beer. And what they really related to was not hearing the history of hops and malt, but more so hearing the trials and tribulations of running a small business.
Yep.
And how to raise money and how to balance your books and how to find good staff and blah, 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 blah.
Yeah, I loved your transparency, your blog. I've listened to your podcast. Because I chair the second biggest craft brewery here in Tasmania, the Hobart Brewing Company. And I remember probably 3 or 4 years ago coming across one of your blog posts because I literally just Googled. I was challenging one of the senior people in the business, I won't name who, their numbers on what it costs us to make beer. So I just jumped on Google and said, how much does it cost to make a keg of craft beer or something like that? And your blog post came up number one. And I could not believe the detail that you guys went into and shared everything. It was just brilliant.
Yeah, well, it was a question that we didn't have the answer to either at the time. And we did that as well. We Googled it and couldn't find anything. So we thought, well, how about we try and break this down and figure it out, and then and share it. And that was just that became part of the Black Ops story, was sharing everything that we learned along the way. And it wasn't always right, but it was honest.
Yep. Yeah. Do you have some key numbers you can share to illustrate the growth of the business over the 9 years? And for the audience's context, I know craft brewing, every man and his dog literally is opening a craft brewery at the moment in 2023. But 9 years ago, when you guys started, as you said before, there's only one on the Gold Coast. It was very, very early days in the craft scene here in Australia. America is probably 2 or 3 years ahead of us, so you guys could see that wave coming. But you guys were one of the forerunners of craft really in Australia.
Yeah, so before us was the grandfathers of the industry. So Stone and Wood, Mountain Goat, Little Creatures, and they had been around for 10 years at that time when we came into it. So we were like the new kids on the block, doing things a little bit differently, and it was really fun because we got to get a lot of experience and advice from people who'd been there and done that, but also kind of find our own way in a new emerging market. But in terms of like numbers, to put it in perspective, like when we first started, when we first opened the doors to HQ before Gypsy Brewing, that was, we weren't making any money. Mm-hmm. We were just trying to get our name out there and covering a few of our costs. But when we opened the doors to HQ and started actually operating as a legitimate business, in the first year, the three of us were doing everything. We were making the beer, delivering the beer, running the bar at night, and everything in between. So it took us a good 12, 18 months to get to a position where we could start paying ourselves a humble salary and hiring some staff to help us out. And then that quickly snowballed over the next several years, and we were growing. We were doubling at least in size year on year for the first 5 years.
Wow.
To the most recent figures, we're doing somewhere in the vicinity of 2.5 to 3 million litres a year. We've got 80 odd staff members, and we're in almost every major bottle shop in the country.
Yep. That's fantastic, Govs. Over 9 years, that is amazing growth. Well done to you, Eddie, Dan, and the team.
Yeah, cheers.
And so we'll get on to funding in a minute, but some of the numbers, or all of your numbers really, not just because you're transparency, but you've done some crowdfunding as well. So your last crowdfund was about a year ago. Do you remember what your top line was there in that document?
Yeah, so we were looking to raise about $2 million to help fund the next stage of our growth, which was in a long line of capital raising that we've done over the years through every method possible. Running a small business is like, you need to be good at finding money. And so we would try every option available to us. Obviously in the early days, banks didn't want to touch us. We couldn't get a credit card, let alone a loan. So we had to employ some private equity raising. Later on, we did crowdfunding when it became available in Australia. The first iteration was reward-based. It was prior to equity-based crowdfunding.
So that's pre-sales, basically?
Yeah. So we were the first brewery to do crowdfunding in Australia. It was reward-based. We basically pre-sold our first cartons of beer. And the downside with rewards-based crowdfunding is you actually have to give something up in return, which is great if it's a digital asset, but when it's a consumable good, it costs money to make. So I think we raised about 25 grand, and we spent about 30 grand just delivering on our promises. However, it was cool to be the first. It was a big learning curve for us. And then when equity-based crowdfunding came in, we were the first brewery to engage that platform as well.
That was August 2018 from memory in Australia when the laws came in.
Yep. Yeah, so we raised, I think, about $400,000 in the first day.
Wow. That was your maximum? That's what you're going for?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
And then, last year we raised just over $2 million in the first day.
Yeah, that's amazing. Congratulations. Yeah, I was just looking at the IM now. That was in January, a year ago. I'm just trying to look for what your top line sales were back then, just to show the growth. So, yeah, it was looking like, wow, you were over 14 million at that point in sales.
Yep.
That's phenomenal, mate. Well done. And you, at that point, you were the largest crowdfund in Australia in the beverage sector, and then Your Mates Brewing, as we were talking about before we hit record, in the Sunshine Coast, raised 2.5 million a couple of months ago in an hour or something. Yeah.
Yeah, those guys did a fantastic job. You know, doing crowdfunding is a lot of work. You have to really get behind your message and get it out there, and get as many people as excited and committed to signing up as quickly as possible. Those types of platforms tend to do really well when you get a lot of very quick buyers. So I believe the Birchall guys used to say to us, you want to raise at least half of your money in the first day.
Yep.
Otherwise, because it gets harder and harder, that's a good indication of the people that were just chomping at the bit, have put it in their diary and have jumped on it quickly. So, for the Two Mates guys, I think I watched their campaign leading up to their launch date, and they were just ticking all the boxes. I was sure that it was going to be a huge success in it, and it was.
Yeah, Your Mates, and we were talking about before, and I read when I was studying their crowdfund, that the Sunshine Coast population of about 300,000 people, but it's got 31 craft breweries. So for them to have such a tribe and a following for people to jump onto their crowdfund is amazing. It's the largest per capita in Australia for craft breweries, basically, up in the Sunshine Coast, just north of Brisbane. You guys are south of Brisbane.
Yeah. And, if you go up to the Sunshine Coast, you will see that, like, it is Your Mates territory. The guys are just absolute legends. They've got such a good foundation story. They make great beer. Their brewery is tap room is just so welcoming, and it feels like home. So I'm not shocked that they're number one.
I'll check it out when I'm back up there, hopefully for BrewCon in August. That'll be great.
Yeah.
When was the moment you felt like you had succeeded?
It was about 2 or 3 months ago, actually. So for me, my journey as a brewer turned business owner was about building my own brewery. I wanted to prove to myself and to my colleagues that I had what it took to not just brew beer, but to also run and grow a brewery around that. And so early on, success was about succeeding in business, and I think succeeding in the small business in the early days, it's just staying afloat, being able to survive those early years. That was complemented by a range of different awards for the beers that we'd made. Also some consumer-based awards about perception and favorites and things like that. So I think any one of these is great to have, but when you have them all, it kind of reinforces that you're doing the right thing. And so over the years, we grew Black Ops into something bigger and greater than I think any of us ever thought it would be. And in those early years, it was very much reliant on the three of us to do most of the heavy lifting. And in the business, I don't think that's a very safe place to be. It's great to have talent, but not when it's too heavily weighted in any one person.
Yep.
So for me, my measure of success was being able to grow Black Ops to a point where I could actually step out of it and it would continue to exist. So in June last year, I did that, which was about 18 months in the planning, behind the scenes, working with the team and with the guys to set up the team and the processes and the equipment to be able to do that. So I stepped out in June, and 4 or 5 months later, I'm now able to walk into Black Ops, walk into the bar, have a beer, gaze into the brewery, see that everyone is just getting shit done.
Yep.
And to me, that's when I was like, that's success to me. Now I can, work on myself, work on other businesses, and Black Ops will continue to exist.
Go fishing, you get stuck in a sandbar with a restaurant.
Yeah, you get stranded on an island.
That's it. That's phenomenal, Govs. In 9 years, for you to be able to do that. I mean, everyone talks about it when they start up their business a lot, kind of miss that or get off the path of, I want to set this up so I don't have to work in it if I don't want to. So not everyone realizes that dream. So yeah, congratulations. That's phenomenal.
Yeah, cheers.
Is Dan, the other two guys, still working in the business?
Yeah, so Dan and Eddie are still involved. Yeah, I was the lucky first
Yep.
to be able to make the break. And those boys they're on their own path as well. I don't know if they're too eager to jump out or if they're happy to stay on. I guess that's their decisions. They'll continue to ask themselves.
Maybe give
at the moment they're happy to continue working in the business.
Yep. Well, maybe give a shout out so the audience understands what you're working on now, business wise or work wise.
Yeah, sure. So stepping out of Black Ops was, part of me ticking that completion on the Black Ops project. Not just walking away from it, being able to stand back from it. And I turned 38 just recently, so. Personally, I thought I was still young enough to have a crack at something else, and some things that I've really enjoyed doing over the years through Black Ops. One of them in particular was helping other people start their breweries. So I spent a lot of my time over the past several years talking with new brewers, new distillers. Where do we find equipment? Where do you get plumbers and blah 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 blah. And so I decided to step into the consulting world. So as of July last year, I've been doing some brewing and distilling consulting, working on some new projects, working with existing breweries. I'm actually calling you today from a brewery in Lismore.
Yep. New South Wales. Yep.
Yeah, in New South Wales. So I've been working with the guys at Two Mates here, just to on some brewing techniques and training, and helping them, get back on their feet. They're still recovering post flood.
Yeah.
They've had a pretty rough time, but things are looking great for them now. And a few new projects all around the country. So I'm doing project management.
That's great.
Things like that.
And I assume David Ridden from Grandad Jack's. Had him on episode 270. That was a great one. Great to see the Gold Coast, and also they're in Brisbane as well, aren't they?
Yeah. So Rido is a neighbour of ours. They opened their first distillery walking distance from Black Ops 1, which was very convenient. So we'd knock off work and go have a couple of gins.
Yeah. It's very collegial, isn't it? The industry, both brewing and distilling. It's a lot of fun. There's not that fierce competition as you see in a lot of other industries. More than happy to help each other and just sit around and talk shit over a beer or a spirit.
Yeah, I think there's definitely that community aspect to the industry. I think there's like mutual respect when you work in a creative space, like creating things, that you don't really see your competition as that. You see them as someone else doing what you love too.
Yep.
Don't get me wrong. It's not all fucking holding hands and kumbaya. Like, we're still fiercely competitive. We still want to beat each other, but we respect each other. I think it's more like a football team. I still want to win, but I don't want to shit on you to get there.
That's right. Yeah. End of the day, it's just a game. Number one, this is a perfect question for you because I love your brand and the marketing that you guys have done. Number one thing you'd recommend to marketing a fast-growing business?
To marketing, a business, I think, is like truly understanding who your customers are and what they want. It's a cliche, but I think cliches exist for a reason, because it's so true. And often when you're starting out in a small business, people will tend to ask you these questions that you don't have answers for, but they will come back eventually, and you'll be like, oh yeah, I get it. It makes sense. But from a marketing perspective, like, there's just so many new and evolving platforms. It's hard to keep up. So it's finding, the one that works best for you and what the one that you're true customers are actually engaged with.
Yep. Now, on funding, you've spoken about, you did a pre-sales non-equity crowd fund first, then 2 equity crowd funds. It sounds like you've had some bank finance in there as well, if you've got equipment and buildings, etc. Anything else on funding? You had some private rounds as well?
Yeah, we've done several private equity raises. We did our first to actually launch the business. So when we opened Black Ops 1, we did our budget, and we realized we were going to need about $400,000. And at the time, most people thought we were crazy and that it wasn't even half as much as it was going to take us. That old adage of, it takes twice as long and costs twice as much is very true. But sometimes if you're vigilant enough and you're willing to do the hard work, so you can actually make it work. So we had no other option. There was no way we could find $1 million. And so we had about 300 grand. We found a mate who could throw in the extra 100. And that was our first capital raise. It was on the back of having several meetings with people and getting asked questions like, what's your 5-year plan? When am I going to see my money again? And at the time, we just thought people were going to be happy to own a brewery. But no, it turns out they want to actually have some answers to these questions. So it allowed us to grow and learn. And then over the years, we've done several much larger raises and grown our investor portfolio to on whatever the maximum is. I think we hit it last year.
It's 50. Otherwise, you hit the takeover panel, and it's a pain in the ass if you've got more than 50 shareholders that aren't crowd fund shareholders. You can have more under that regime, but I go over 50 private shareholders, then a whole lot more bureaucracy you got to deal with. Just back on that old adage, I've heard a bit of a better take on that. I heard a venture capitalist in London when I was living there 10, 15 years ago say he gets hit up a lot for his money, in people to invest in their business. He says the rule of 4 by 2. So it's either going to take 4 times as long and cost twice as much, or take twice as long and cost 4 times as much. So the only difference is you get to choose which path.
Yeah. I mean, it's very true. I've seen it in play many, many times.
But you guys were able to land on that 400. You set up with 400 grand.
We ended up opening, I think, for 450. So we had to like max out some personal credit cards and call in some favors, but we scraped it in. But we did everything on a budget, and we did everything ourselves. And we ended up writing a book about how to start a brewery on a budget.
Yep.
And it was those book sales that kind of helped us get through in the early days. We were selling more books than eggs.
Love it. Very scrappy. If you were to start up today with plenty of funding, would you go into your industry?
Yeah, absolutely. It's an industry I'm super passionate about. I've built 3 breweries myself through Black Hops. I've helped a number of friends and colleagues build theirs. It's what I'm now doing in my quote unquote retirement. It's a very challenging industry. It's very capital intensive. You need a lot of expensive equipment to make beer. There are a lot of service requirements in terms of plumbing and electrical and council applications and liquor licenses. So there are much easier ways to make money in business. But beer and alcohol is my passion. So I wouldn't have it any other way.
Can you outline the most stressful point in your small business growth journey so our audience can learn from it?
Yeah, look, I think money. Money is always a stressful point, particularly when you don't have any and you don't know where to get it. And so I think in those early days, during the growth of your business, you also develop a thicker skin. When some problems that seemed big at the time seem not even significant now, looking back on them. But I know, looking in some of those early years, we were hand to mouth. Like our bills in and out were just scraping by. We were always stressing, like making, we always had to make sure we had money to pay our staff. That was priority. And then we pay our suppliers. And if there was money left over, we'd pay ourselves. And a lot of times we couldn't. But that was probably the most stressful time. And that was just, I guess, learning about how to manage cash flow.
Yeah, and also I guess doing your numbers, which I'm a big advocate of, obviously upfront to see how much capital you actually need. So yeah, that can help you avoid a lot of that pain if you do that upfront.
Yeah.
What area in business do you feel you've had to work on the most to add the greatest value?
Sorry, could you just repeat that?
Sure. What area in business do you feel you've had to work on most to add the greatest value?
I think the area of business that we've worked the most on and seen the most return is definitely in the culture of our business. And so like developing our staff and having a solid team, we've seen the benefits of when we've gotten it right and how important that is to the success of your business. And we've also seen times when we've got it wrong and how detrimental it can be, particularly when the team gets bigger. You want everyone to be happy and firing on all cylinders. When you've got 5 people, that's relatively easy. When you've got 50, it gets harder. It's understanding what everyone's currency is, what people are looking to get out of, and also trying to keep everyone motivated. So by the end of in the later years of my time at Black Ops, I was more of a HR manager than anything else. Every day was going around to the team, making sure the key players had what they wanted and they were happy and that the team were smiling. And if I could do that, everything else would just happen to fall into place.
Yeah, it's one of my favorite quotes I saw recently is that culture eats strategy for breakfast, which is, I couldn't believe Peter Drucker actually said that, but yeah. But I mean, your culture, you said you got the culture wrong a few times. It can't be anywhere near the fucking shit show that is Brewdog. I'm sure you've read all about their toxic culture, which hopefully they're fixed by now. But, the big Scottish brewer, the best crowdfunding example in the world will return, etc. But I mean, that they were obviously a behemoth. They grew very quickly, etc. But yeah, that sounded like a terrible culture there in brewing.
Yeah, and I think it's very common in a lot of businesses, particularly businesses that big, is keeping and maintaining the culture is almost impossible. And to do it successfully, you've got to invest in it, and you've got to see it as important. But I've like it was sad to see those guys, because when we started in the industry, they were a company that we looked up to and admired, and we're like, that is a measure of success for us. But you just don't know what's going on behind closed doors. You don't know what the full story is, and it's a shame when you hear stories of businesses like that.
Yeah. Anyone wants to read up on it, just Google it. But there was an open letter by 200 current and ex-employees at Brewdog, just outlining how bad the culture was there. But yeah, a good case study on how not to. Hopefully they're on the path of fixing it now. But I was quite shocked. What have you enjoyed the least about managing fast growth?
Well, I kind of like touching on the same subjects is growing up and becoming a more serious business requires, giving up some of the liberties that you get to enjoy as a small company. And it's becoming, you can have the growth, but it comes with some added responsibility. And those responsibilities get bigger and bigger. So, sometimes it suits some people to just remain small and nimble and play in that space. Growth is not always the answer for everyone.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's like, having that structure of, good management without stifling the business, creating too much red tape, making sure that there's good training mechanisms in, because as a senior person of the team, you become less in contact with people at the bottom. So ensuring that message and ethos is still translating throughout the team, it gets really hard.
What do you love most about growing a small business?
Love most about it? The people. I think I like training people. I like empowering people. I like finding new leaders. In the brewing sector, I like finding talent and harnessing it, and giving people an opportunity to explore their dreams, and go down a similar path that I have, and one day open their own brewery. So several of my ex-head brewers have gone on to start their own projects, with my full support. Some of them I now work for as a consultant, which is really exciting for me. I've got to see their entire career growth and development from before they were with Black Ops to now when they're after they've left.
What has been the biggest mindset shift for you in your small business growth journey?
The biggest mind shift for me has been about prioritizing myself a bit more. When you own and run a small business, you generally put yourself last, and that's fine, but it has a timeline, and it's it can start having effects on your personal health, and your personal life as well. Yeah. So I think it's been like a real challenge is putting myself back into an important status, and focusing on some things that help me, which in turn help my businesses.
The number one habit you think a small business owner needs to develop and maintain?
Number one habit it's like just being kind. I think kindness is underrated, and you can get away with making plenty of mistakes if you do it with kindness, and people will allow you the space to grow if you have a kind heart, I think.
Yeah, one of the terms I coined from observation over 24 years now, my own businesses, but 3 years at a large company, international company, that management by fear doesn't work.
No.
Find it hard to define a clear strategy, then communicate it and execute it alongside the rest of your team? Or you currently don't work a simple quarterly strategic plan to boost your team's performance? Our Business Growth Formula online course is perfect for small business owners with 5 to 30 team members wanting to grow. We share the mindsets, habits and tools to be a legendary leader in your business. GrowSmallBusiness.com.
Can you talk to how you've added people to the team, some wins, mistakes and advice for those listening? I mean, going from 3 FTE up to 80, you would have seen a lot of people.
Staff coming in. Yeah. So I think in the early days we were hiring very specific critical roles. So it would be a big deal for us to hire someone. It'd be a decision that all three of us would make. We'd all be in on the interviews, and we'd try and pick the right person. We've hired for numerous reasons. We've hired for cultural fits, and we've hired for talents and skills. And 9 times out of 10, it's the cultural fit is the correct hire. It's just every now and then, you hire someone you need because they can do the task.
Yeah.
But that cultural fit is so critical, particularly in a small team. Yeah. It's not until your team grows that you can actually start managing, having not everyone is drinking the Kool-Aid, and you've got different people there for different reasons.
Well, that's the next question. What are some of the things you recommend to building a sustainable and kick-ass culture to help with the growth?
I think building, let alone sustaining and managing a kick-ass culture is something that every business owner should strive for if they don't. And it's certainly not easy. I don't think there's any one miracle answer here. It's about getting a number of things right. But for me, my kind of go-to in that space is about understanding people's currency, what drives them, what are they there for. Some people are very motivated to work for money, and that's great. some people, money is not everything, and lifestyle and balance is more important. And I think as a good leader, it's understanding that and being able to manage these different currencies rather than having one rule for everyone, because ultimately you can only please some people some of the time. But I think when you really try, you can please almost everyone almost all the time.
Look, I totally agree that people are motivated by different things. I think small business owners, when they've got their manager's hat on, if they haven't got the experience or done the training or read up on it, that they miss that, and they think that just throwing money at people or trying to manage by fear in some instances is what it's all about. But people value things like challenging work, alignment to mission and values, feedback and development, etc., a lot more than money in most HR surveys. So it's a really important point for the business owner or owners and managers to be aware of that, and then change their communication style with those people accordingly. Gets a lot more out of the team. Tell our audience how you've handled balance.
Oh, work-life balance. No, well, I was terrible at it for the first 5 years, but it was a matter of necessity. So I think for the first 4 or 5 years, I was at work almost every day of the year. Occasionally, I'd get to go away, but it was generally on a work trip. I didn't mind. I loved going to beer festivals and beer conferences. So it was, I call it work, but it was pretty fun. But I was I'd be at the brewery 7 days a week. On the weekends, it was just be popping in to make sure everything was okay. But I was there on every Easter. I was there every Christmas. And I loved doing it. But it's not sustainable. And, eventually everyone will kind of start to burn out. And so I started to probably notice that happening to me at about 4 to 5 year mark. And that's when I started needing to make some decisions that prioritize that balance for me. I also have a young family, so I've got 2 young boys that need and want to spend time with me, and that I want to be spending time with as well. But it's breaking down that guilt barrier for some business owners, and myself included, of like, if I like to lead from the front and lead by example. So the reason I'm there first thing in the morning, last thing at night, and every weekend is to show the people underneath me how dedicated, hardworking I am, and also that I'm not asking anyone to do anything that I haven't done. That comes at a price. So I had to start, giving myself the weekend off, also giving the team the opportunity to take the responsibility to do it, and also give them an opportunity to fail sometimes and learn. And also like take up some hobbies. So I got back into an old passion of mine, which is golf. So I go out on the weekends and leave the phone in the car and spend 4 hours out walking around swearing at trees.
Yeah, I've never heard anyone describe it that way, but that is very accurate. Have you played any of the world-class golf courses down here in Tasmania? You've got Barnbougle, Lost Farm, Ocean Dunes, and Cape Wickham, both the last two on King Island. There's a new one being built here just in Hobart as well, and open.
No, but that sounded like an invitation.
It's certainly an invitation. I'll send you episode 300 that just went live recently. Good mate of mine, Greg Ramsey, who's the founder of Barnbougle Dunes, in late 2004 when it opened. It's a links course. It's on the edge of the ocean in sand dunes, and they opened, and they've always been since that. What's that? 18, 19 years now. The #1 public golf course in Australia. And within the first 6 months of opening, they were ranked in the top 50 courses in the world. And I asked Greg, before I moved to London, we were out playing golf at Royal Hobart, and I said, I've been meaning to ask, we'll look it up, how many golf courses are there in the world? And he said, they say America has half of the courses in the world, and there's about 25,000 there. So 50 out of 50,000 golf courses, he happens to open one in the top 50. So I think you should definitely come down and play some golf with him.
Mate, I'm keen. Count me.
And he loves, well, he owns the New Zealand Whiskey Collection along with myself. So he's right into whiskey and distilling and golf. So they're his two passions after his family, obviously. How much professional development have you invested in yourself?
Like over the years, plenty. I've tried everything as an individual and as a team. Dan, Eddie, and myself identified pretty early on that we knew that we were learning a lot of what we had to do as we were doing it. And when we were just doing that by ourselves, that was fine, because when we made mistakes, it was only us that were affected by it. So when we started to develop the team and, all of a sudden we had 20, 30 staff working under us, we saw the importance of us being able to continue to grow as leaders. So we used to make time to go and do activities together. We'd engage with different leaders in like business coaching space and try and get a better understanding of how we could be better bosses.
Yeah.
Personally, it's just something that I strive to do, is become a better human, a better father, a better partner, a better business owner. I love talking to other people who have done it, learn from other people's mistakes, also talk to people who are also in the thick of it as well. I like engaging with people outside of my space, looking at people who are successful in their own right, whether it be in sports or the creative arts, and kind of get some inspiration that way.
You mentioned coaches. Have you had mentors as well along the way?
Yeah, I guess we certainly did. I never really thought of them like that, but there's been several people over the years who I would go to for guidance, people who had worked in the industry or just worked in business, who I'd reach out to, but I wouldn't say, I've got one particular mentor.
Yep. Do you have a board of directors or advisors?
Yes. Yeah, we do.
How often do they meet? Do you have a chair and any independence on that board?
Yes. So I think the meetings are like every quarterly or 6 months, and they consist of owners and independents.
Yep. Great. Now, you're one of the few we've had on that's exited business. So I assume you're still a shareholder at Black Ops. You haven't exited financially, but operationally you've exited. Any advice? Yes. I mean, and you've done a sterling job from the sounds of it over 9 years. Any advice for the audience listening about potentially one day them getting out so they can go and play more golf or do more fishing?
Yeah, well, it's a lot of work, because for anyone who's like myself, like I'm an overworker, so I'll generally be doing the job of 3 or 4 people. So it's just being realistic. If you're going to try and replace yourself, it's like no one is going to have the drive or motivation to work as hard and long as you. So it's breaking your role down into realistic roles, and then spending the time to ensure that there's a good training mechanism and handover period. So yeah, for me it was about 18 months from when I decided to when I could actually have a party and walk out.
That's great. All right, guys, we're on to our final 5 questions. What do you think is the hardest thing in growing a small business?
Cash flow. Absolutely, cash flow. Coming from a business that's so cash heavy, as I mentioned before, the amount of capital and assets you need just to open the doors is outrageous. So being able to fund those and then be able to fund the costs, is like cash flow is king.
Favorite business book which has helped you the most?
I wouldn't say I've got a favorite business book. I like to read books that aren't typical business books, that kind of inspire me in the same way. And as I told you, one of my passions is golf. It's something that really relaxes me. And one of my favorite books to read is Zen Golf.
All right.
So becoming, controlling your mind over your body. It's written by Dr. Joseph Parent. It's an absolute classic, but I believe you can replace golf in that book with business, and it's still applicable. And it's a book that I've reread plenty of times, and it's about trying to become more zen and have control over your mind and your thoughts, and set yourself up to win.
Did it help your golf game? How many points, how many shots did you knock off your handicap?
It definitely helped my golf game. I don't know if it helped my handicap, but it certainly made me be able to walk off the course smiling and
not wrapping a club around a tree.
Yeah, I stopped doing that.
Younger.
I stopped breaking clubs.
Yeah. Any great podcasts or online learning tools you use for your own professional development?
Yeah, I'd have to say our own podcast is fantastic. There's a shameless self-plug there.
It's good. One tool you'd recommend to help grow a small business?
Tool?
Yeah.
Oh, it's hard to answer some of these questions so simply, but for me, the best tool you can have is guidance and mentorship. Whether you call it that or something else, it's talk to people who have been there and done that. Learn some lessons through them, not by yourself.
Finally, my favorite question: what would you tell yourself on day one of starting out 9 years ago?
Oh, good question. I think I would have told myself to take one day off a week. Everything will be fine.
Yep. Oh, fantastic. Well, Gubs, I look forward to sharing a beer with you at BrewCon on the Gold Coast in August, and probably before then at our distillery opening on Six Tricks, and get you down here for some golf as well with Rambo at some of those golf courses, and obviously have a few beers down here in Tasmania. I really appreciate your time. Congratulations to you, Dan, Eddie, and the wider team. That's phenomenal over 9 years, going from 3 FTE to 80, and multiple sites, great brand, a couple of crowd funds under your belt as well. So yeah, congratulations.
Awesome. Thanks, mate. Thanks for having me on. And yeah, look forward to having a whiskey and a hit with you.
That's it. Thanks for listening. Please leave a review in iTunes or whatever platform you listen to us on. It means more small business owners will find our cast and help people with their business growth journey.